Hello, fellow crafters. This is Yana Smakula for SimonsSTM.com. Welcome back for another Yippee For Yana video. Today I'm playing with the Slimline Builder stamp set, which is designed, of course, to make slimline cards. But I'll show you two additional ways to use it to make regular, traditional size A2 projects, and of course, a slimline card. Now here's a look at this stamp set. It is gorgeous. I particularly love the huge solid piece to make the sky. It is beautiful. The bottom ground piece is separate to make it easier for you to stamp these in different colors of ink. You also have two tree stamps, ornaments for both trees or snow if that's how you'd like to use it, and of course, beautiful sentiments. We will start with a slimline card. I already have my Misty stamping tool set up, and I will say that you do need to use a stamping tool such as Misty or similar for best results when working with this stamp set. I have a panel of white cardstock. This is Neenah Solar White 80 pound, and it measures 3.5 by 8.5 inches. This panel will be trimmed down later. Now, this first card is heavily inspired by Debbie Hughes. I love everything that Debbie makes. Her work often inspires me, and I'm sure many of you feel the same way. Before I do any actual stamping, I'm going to prep my brand new stamp by inking it up with embossing ink. This is a great trick as it primes the stamp and allows it to take the ink better right away. You've probably noticed that the more you stamp, the better impressions you get with your clear stamps. That's because they become primed and seasoned over time. Usually, when you stamp with a brand new stamp for the first time, the impression you get is not the best. Priming your stamp with clear embossing ink is helpful to get your stamp going, so to speak. I inked my stamp up with clear embossing ink and stamped it onto the panel, although you can just ink the stamp up and wipe it clean. You don't need to do any stamping. The colors of ink I picked for this card and all of my cards today are Cloudy Sky, Audrey Blue, High Dive, and Deep Sea from Simon Says Stamp. We are going to be doing a bit of an ombre stamping, but without the use of ombre ink pads. The idea is to ink up the background with all four colors of ink, progressing from the lightest color at the bottom to the darkest color at the top. I've inked up and stamped my latest color, Cloudy Sky, and I double stamped it for better ink coverage. This is why it's so helpful to use the Misty. Next, I'm inking the stamp with my slightly darker color, which is Audrey Blue, and I overlap the Cloudy Sky quite a bit, extending this color up quite a bit as well, nearly all the way to the top. And I also double stamped the Audrey Blue. Next, I'm inking the stamp up with High Dive, bringing this color all the way to the top, and also overlapping the Audrey Blue quite a bit. And again, I double stamp this to have better ink coverage. Finally, I'm adding the Deep Sea color just at the top of the sky to make it darkest in that area, and stamping it several times to have the best impression possible. So this creates a beautiful ombre night sky. You have a deep, dark blue at the top, the light blue at the bottom, with perfectly white snow falling down the card. I can almost hear the Christmas music playing. This is a really beautiful background that can be used with a variety of images, not just the images in this stamp set. I think it would make a fabulous background for all the winter and Christmas critters out there or other scene building stamp sets. The dots can also represent these stars and thus allow this background to be used for summer camping cards or similar. Next, I'm going to add some sparkle and shine to the background using a shimmer spray. My favorite one is from Hero Arts, White Iridescent Shimmer Spray. I have barely any spray left in the bottle, and by the time I'll be making the third card in this video, I'll actually add water to the bottle to dilute all of the shimmer and have my spray last me a little bit longer. You do need to shake the bottle quite a bit so that you have the spray or the shimmer moving in the liquid. The next step is to stamp the trees. I'm going to stamp both the large and the small trees, and I will add Christmas ornaments to the largest tree later to help it pop off the background. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink for my stamping as it is my favorite kind of ink for stamping anything black, especially if I don't plan any coloring over it. This stamp set comes with another layer for the trees, a layer to create ornaments or snow over the tree. I'm stamping mine over the large tree in white pigment ink. Now my idea is to add Nuvo drops in red and white over the tree. And I just need this stamped layer for placement purposes. I don't need it to be stamped perfectly, and you can see that that white ink actually doesn't give me a perfect result. But like I said, I do only need it for placement purposes, as I'll add Nuvo drops over it. Next, I used my paper trimmer and trimmed the background so that I didn't have any white border around my stamping, just a pretty background panel. I also got a layer of fun foam. I don't have any white fun foam in my stash, but I do have loads of colored fun foam. So this foam is blue, and I'm adding double-sided tape to the foam to be able to adhere it behind the panel and onto the card. I first planned to use a white card base, but later changed my mind and used a dark teal card base for this card. I made it using the Hero Arts Adriatic cardstock. So using a blue fun foam actually worked well here, as it sort of blended with the color of the card base and even some of the stamping on my panel. And I did cut my fun foam slightly smaller than the panel. I would say about a 1/4 inch smaller than the panel itself. Next, I die cut a banner from Simon's Schoolhouse Red cardstock using a banner die from Spellbinders. It is one from the Spellbinders Glimmer Sentiment sets. I treated the panel with anti-static powder. I inked the stamp with clear embossing ink and stamped it onto the banner. The sentiment reads, "Happy Holidays." I added white embossing powder onto the sentiment and heat set it with my heat tool to melt the powder in place. Later, I'll be using white detail embossing powder. For this sentiment, however, I used regular white embossing powder. Now, the anti-static powder leaves a milky residue on the paper, and I like to use a regular pencil eraser to remove it. Once I heat set the image, I give it a couple of seconds to cool off, and then I use my pencil eraser. It works like a charm and removes any residue perfectly from the cardstock. I used foam adhesive squares and foam mounted the sentiment banner onto my card. Here you can see that I've already switched to a different color card base. And I really like how this Adriatic color ties in with the colors that I used to stamp the background. I also stamped a little from All of Us sentiment at the bottom of the card, again using the same VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I was able to stamp it without any problems as I had a solid layer of fun foam under my panel. If you're using foam squares to pop your panel up, it is best to do any stamping before you foam mount the panel onto the card, as the stamping might end up being imperfect. The paper might sag where there is no foam squares, and you run the risk of ruining your lovely panel. Having nearly finished this card, I mean having adhered everything in place, I used Nuvo drops in white and red, and those colors are gloss white and gloss red berry. I added dimensional dots over the white stamped circles on my tree. Now I had to wait to adhere everything down before I could add the Nuvo drops, as I didn't want to accidentally smear the wet drops while still assembling the card. I alternated red and white dots on the card, and by the way, I also have a piece of washi tape there. It actually looks rather odd and out of place, but it's only there temporarily to hold the card shut while I add the drops and while they dry, so that the card doesn't accidentally pop open and the drops end up drying at an angle. You know what I mean? Now, the next two cards I have for you today are traditional A2 size cards. I wanted to try and see if I could use the Slimline products for traditional size cards. The panel I have here is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. I'm going to stamp just a part of this background, the top part, and I'll stamp it twice to fill in the entire panel. I used the same colors of ink to stamp the background, and I'm not going to show you the stamping part again in detail, as it's pretty much the same. So here you can see the super sped up version. Having stamped one background, I've repositioned the stamp on the panel so that it continued the background to the left to fill the entire panel of the card. And again, I used the same colors as before to stamp my background. Now, this ended up looking almost perfectly with a slightly visible seam between the two impressions. Here you can see the seam a little bit on the background. To fix that and to hide the seam, I gave this background a generous spritzing of the same shimmer spray. and that worked like a charm. You can't really see the seam at all, maybe just a tiny bit at the bottom there, but I'll add stamped trees in that section, and that will hide it completely. Now, speaking of the trees, for this card, I wanted to stamp just the tree tops to make it look like you were seeing just the top of the forest. And again, I used both the small and large trees in the same VersaFine Onyx black ink and stamped the images filling the bottom edge of the panel. I wanted to have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year sentiment on this card. I had white hand embossed a Merry Christmas message on red cardstock, exactly as I did for my first card. But the second part of the sentiment, I wanted to have it stamped directly on the background. Now, the shimmer spray makes it kind of hard to do any stamping over it, so here I tested stamping the sentiment on the background, where I had the shimmer. Now, I did like how it looked when I just tested it. Had that looked bad, I knew I'd be able to cover that up with that red banner, so I actually stamped that sentiment where I planned to place the red banner. But then I moved the panel up and stamped it again, but that didn't stamp too well, and I had to improvise. So I stamped the sentiment on a white cardstock panel or on a white cardstock strip, and I just added that below the Merry Christmas. I actually think that ended up looking quite nice. I foam mounted both onto the background, and the background was actually trimmed to 4 by 5¼ inches, and it was foam mounted onto the card. I also added Nuvo drops in white and red onto the tree as I did on my Slimline card. Moving on, the last card for today features a sentiment from another stamp set from Simon, the Slimline Greetings. Oh my goodness, these sentiments are incredible. They, of course, are meant for Slimline cards, but I'm using the Merry Christmas sentiment on a traditional size A2 card today. I've placed a panel of light blue cardstock, this is Hero Arts Arctic, inside my mini Misty, and I've positioned the stamps, aligning them against the bottom edge on the left-hand side of the panel. I've treated the panel with anti-static powder. I inked the sentiment with clear embossing ink and stamped it onto the panel. Next, I added white detail embossing powder. This is a very detailed, very fine line sentiment, so best to use a white detail embossing powder here to preserve the most detail in the sentiment. And then I heat set it with my heat tool to melt the powder in place. You can see I also have already stamped a smaller size panel using that same Slimline Builder stamp set, and my idea was to foam mount the panel onto the background. I did that using foam adhesive. I also added Nuvo drops in red and white as I did on the other two cards. I sprayed the background with the same shimmer spray and added a red banner with the white heat embossed "Have Yourself a," so that the entire sentiment reads, "Have yourself a Merry Christmas." That's it from me for today. I hope you found this video useful. Let me know in the comments below. Now, if you make a card inspired by this video, you guys know the drill. We'd love it if you shared your project online and tagged us on social media. We always enjoy seeing what you make. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up and to subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet done so. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'll see you next time. Bye!